Hello, and welcome to What a World podcast. In this series, we will be exploring the possibilities of transforming the inner life of the individual. The goal of these conversations is to help you and me develop the tools necessary to change ourselves as well as the world around us. I am your guide and your host, Randall Thomas. Join me as I speak with seekers of truth and transformation right now on What a World podcast. So I'm sitting here in Sewanee, Tennessee with Thomas Anderson, who is a trained physicist, writer, musician, and healer. He's a scientifically minded mystic and waterfall enthusiast. Thomas is a prolific writer, and his latest book, named Master Handbook of Sound Healing, right?
That's it.
He also designs and builds high-fidelity sound immersion tables and is a student and innovator in sound therapy and theory. Welcome, Thomas.
Hey.
This is
glad to see you.
This is awesome out here. It's beautiful out in the. You're basically a mountain man.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Well, let's just jump right into some of this stuff. So first of all, what makes you so keen on living on a mountain?
Well, I'm looking out the big windows at the green trees right now and listening to the birds in the background coming through the screen door. And I think that might answer the question.
Yeah.
I really like to be in nature. Pretty much all my favorite aspects of life are nature oriented. So, and I have a particular attraction to mountains, I think. I've lived in some flat places and I never felt very comfortable. I always feel more comfortable if there's hills, even if they're in the distance. For some reason, if it's totally flat, I feel kind of, I don't know, sort of unsafe, like a baby without a blanket or something.
Yeah. I get that. I'm drawn to mountains. I remember being in Maui and looking at the mountains, just like, I wish I could live there. I wish I could live in Maui.
I lived in Maui for a little while.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What did you do out there?
That's a pretty big story, and I suspect maybe one of your questions will lead to it.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. So let's see. One of the questions that I kind of want to ask you about is your studies in Mexico. If you want to speak on that a little bit, tell me who your teacher was and kind of what he taught you.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Probably about 10 years ago, I went to a week-long Qigong training with Ken Cohen, who's a very well-renowned Qigong master who travels around teaching, and he wrote one of the most famous books about Qigong. I think it might be called The Way of Qigong. It's probably the most common Qigong book that exists. And I went there to this retreat, and basically I have had a lot of different Qigong teachers, and I just wasn't really drawn to his style and approach of teaching. I think he's a great teacher. He obviously is. But I just kind of kept wanting to sort of skip out on the classes and go out in the woods and stuff. And is in a really beautiful place. And I was, I think, skipping one of his classes and started talking to his wife, who's a Yaqui native woman named Grace, and immediately just super hit it off. I just loved this woman so much and love her. She's an amazing person. And she started telling me about her teacher in Mexico, a Yaqui Mayan medicine man who's now 105 years old. His name is Tata Cachora. She was like, I just have a feeling you really need to meet him. I think you need to meet my teacher. And then she was also telling me that many believe that he is the character he's the person on whom the character Don Juan in Carlos Castaneda's books was based. And one of my teachers in the past assigned me to read those books in order to better understand what it's like to be a student of such a person. And so I'd read those books a lot in order to learn what it's like to be a student of someone like that. And so when I drove to Mexico, drove to Tecate, and then up into the mountains, and pulled up at this, I didn't know what I was getting into, way up on this crazy road that actually destroyed my car trying to drive over it, and then pull up, and there's all these native people doing a ceremonial dance, and I just kind of drive up to it in my bright red Saab, and I felt like a real dork. Yeah. And I was like, I don't know, is this okay to park here next to the ceremonial dance in the mountains?
Bring my loincloth?
Yeah, I didn't know what I was getting into. And then I participated in the dance, and where you dance all day for 4 days straight, and you do a sweat lodge around sunrise and a sweat lodge at sunset, and sleep for a couple hours, and then in the morning when it's still dark, you hear a conch blow. It's time to get up and start dancing again. These very, very difficult athletic dances. And he was the sort of lead. There's this old medicine man guy sitting there kind of watching, and everybody obviously treats this person with a lot of respect. So I didn't really get to talk to him or anything, but then I asked him if I could come to his house. Interestingly, right after the dance, I got tremendously and peculiarly ill. I was staying in my hotel. I was going to meet him the next day, and I had a peculiar illness that didn't seem like it was a virus or anything, where I projectile vomited until I was empty, until there wasn't a drop left in me, and then I was fine. Which was fascinating in and of itself. Yeah. Then I went to see him, and we sat and talked. He doesn't speak English. He doesn't only speak Spanish, but he doesn't speak English, and I don't speak Spanish very well. At that time, I spoke practically none. Now I can speak a little. And we talked for hours, and he let me record our conversation. And during the midst of that conversation, he invited me to be his student. And I was very thrilled. I was like, This is great, because I had been looking for another teacher since my last teacher relationship had ended with my previous teacher. For 10 years, I couldn't find someone who I deemed... I'm very picky about someone. I'm willing to put myself in the position of doing everything they command. Yeah. You know, you should be picky about that. Yeah. And anyway, so I then started taking up the practice of going to visit him a lot. So I was going there for like 6 times a year or so. Just every chance I got, I would drive a couple thousand miles, drive into Mexico, and spend as much time as he would be willing to spend with me. And that's been going on for the last 8 years or so. And I'm not sure what to say. There's a lot to say. People always ask me what specifically he teaches me, and I don't think I can actually answer that. What happens in my experience is that by being around such a person, things start happening that don't come directly from him. So if I go spend time with him for a week or two or a few days or whatever, things start happening in my life away from him. So if I go stay at his house, visit him, and then go back into the town, sort of life unfolds in a different way that teaches a lot of deep lessons and generally extraordinarily challenging lessons. Like the level of challenge is kind of like if it were a video game. If you could turn up the challenge level, it's like when I'm around him or the more time I spend with him, the more the challenge level gets turned up to something that seems to be just beyond my capabilities of handling it, so that my weaknesses get exposed very, very clearly in some really peculiar and unforeseen way, over and over and over, until the sort of a little new skill set or something appears, and then the challenge level goes up.
Yeah.
And I don't know really how to describe it better than that.
It sounds kind of like synchronicity, but
Stuff like that.
Challenging synchronicities,
and very, very altered reality states that are, sober reality states, but where things are very different and otherworldly is. And I spend a lot of my best friends are his students. So he has kind of an entourage of students and family around him. He has, I think, 45 children. Wow. Maybe 44. I think it's 45 children.
What?
120 or 121 grandchildren. And I think 50 something great grandchildren and somewhere around a dozen great grandchildren. So he's a lot of family. And some of his children are in their 80s. And some of his children are in their 20s.
Is he still making children, or?
I think his youngest child is, who's a dear friend of mine. I think he's like 25 or something. Man.
So he's making children into his 80s.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
It's wild.
That's a lot of children. That kind of brings me to one of my other questions. I'm wondering about some of your mystical experiences. Is there one that kind of jumps out at you right now that you would want to explain? I know that's a hard
Here's
question.
one. This is my very first memory in life, and it involves that clock right there, which isn't running right now because I need to oil it and clean it. The first word I ever spoke was tick-tock, and the second word I spoke was clock. And before I could speak, I was really, really fascinated with clocks. My grandparents, I spent a lot of time at their house, and they had that clock and another clock that's in the other room. That clock right there was a wedding gift to my great-grandparents. And I would gaze at the clocks, and before I could speak, I noticed that, I guess I had said tick-tock and clock because I think the first thing I wanted to talk about was the clock situation I was witnessing. What I would notice is I would look at the clock, and it was, the hands were stationary, and then they're not moving, except the pendulum would go tick-tock, tick-tock. And then I'd, start playing with some toys or something, and then look back at the clock later, and it had moved. And then I would look, and it's never moving every time I look at it, the hands. But then I do something else and then look back, and it moved. So I thought the clock was sort of playing a trick on me and always moving when I wasn't looking. And it was driving me crazy so much that I don't know if driving crazy, it was something I was very wondering about. And so as soon as I could speak, I asked my dad, and I remember asking him this, and it's probably not as soon as I could speak, but soon after, I asked him, what's the deal? I mean, I look at the clock, it's never moving, but then I turn away and then look later and it moved. And he said, it's just moving so slowly you can't see it. And I remember it blew my mind. And so very soon thereafter, I don't know if it was the same day or not, I sat in the room alone and gazed at that clock. And the face isn't on it right now, but I looked at the hands and thought about what my dad said. He said the hands are just moving so slowly you can't see. So I decided to try to see. So I gazed at the clock. I just stared at it. It's going tick tock, tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. And I just stared and gazed and watched. I'm like, I am going to see those things move. And it, all of a sudden, I can't describe what I visually saw, but all time shifted drastically and the pendulum starts going, and I could see the hands going, moving rapidly, like you're playing a video in fast motion. And then I pop out of it, and then it goes back to normal. And I'd seen the hands move, a few minutes worth in the matter of a couple seconds. And then I was just blown away and like, holy moly, I just witnessed something extraordinary. And then it wasn't until I was in graduate school for physics studying time that I suddenly and very deeply remembered that experience. I'd totally forgotten it because I was probably 2 years old or something. I just learned to speak, however old kids are when they learn to speak, something like that. And so that was a very mystical experience that had kind of, I think, set the tone for my life.
Yeah, definitely. From our talks, it seems like attention is a big theme in your life. And so that might be your first kind of foray into experimenting with attention itself.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And so with attention being said, what kind of healing practices do you do?
Well, probably the central feature of my healing life has been Qigong. And Qigong refers to a whole class of type of traditional Chinese practices that are essentially the inner part of martial arts, the non-martial aspects of martial arts. You could, in fact, fairly realistically say that martial arts are a martial application of Qigong. And then you could say that acupuncture is a healing application of Qigong. So Qigong is kind of this central part of all of these various types of forms, including martial arts and traditional Chinese medicine practices. And basically, I have, over the course of my time practicing and studying Qigong, come to really think of it in terms of attention more than in terms of Qi. One thing my teacher, Master Quan, used to say, he said that and this is, I think, a really common Qigong teaching sort of statement, is that where your attention goes, your energy flows. And that what happened is I started teaching Qigong to kids and teaching in high schools and teaching to groups. And I would focus on that, where your attention goes, your energy flows. And then I started just essentially eliminating the whole energy part. And it was still just the same, except it didn't involve believing in some sort of phenomenon, where people are looking for energy and they're wanting to feel Qi and they're wanting to sense this magical thing that they think I feel that they don't feel. But really, in the practice of Qigong, you realize that what you already feel is Qi. It's not that Qi is this new thing you feel. It's rather what you already feel. Like wherever you feel your body right now, that's Qi. It's just where you feel is where Qi is. So I started focusing on, well, what's the point of saying energy in the first place if it doesn't have any added feature to the experience of it? And so I guess I started practicing Qigong regularly a little over 20 years ago. Wow. And studying with as many teachers, and I spent time with Master Quan when I was with him. I probably spent 3 to 5 hours a day with him, 7 days a week for probably about a year and a half or 2 years. So I was really, really devoted to it for the time that I was around him. And basically, at some point, probably around 1999, I got a didgeridoo and started playing didgeridoo. And that was when I was really, really super, super focused on my Qigong practice and also doing sort of applied Qigong. I was doing kind of Reiki type therapy for people, helping people with headaches or people had broken ankles. I would help them try to heal their ankle faster by putting my hands on them and helping direct their energy, and also doing acupressure. And I played didgeridoo pointed on people. The sound vibrates out the end of it, and I would point it at people, and I realized that with the sound, I could do the same thing without touching someone. And this is before I'd ever heard of anything called sound therapy, and I couldn't find any books about it. But basically, through my Qigong practice and then through eventually discovering that you could sort of apply Qigong in a sense through applying sound vibrations to someone's body, I started really focusing a lot more on attention. And I went to university for 8 full-time years studying physics, and the entire time I was focused on, in the background, trying to figure out what Qi is. And that was my underlying purpose, like to understand Qi, because modern medicine and science have no place for Qi. There's no Qi in modern medicine. Even though acupuncture is an accepted form of accepted medical practice, simply because it works in lots of cases, it relieves people of things, but nobody really knows why, like what is going on. And people try to claim that it's electrical channels running through your body or magnetic channels. And I've come to believe that it's really attention, that our mind, whatever that is, has a feature that's kind of like the direction that it points that we call attention. And you can put your attention, right now I can put my attention on my voice, or I can put my attention onto the bottom of my feet. Attention can go into physical things. It can go into concepts. You can put your attention on the thought of a memory. You can put it on a thought of another person. You can put it on something that you want to achieve in your life. You can put it on something you want to eat for dinner later. You can put your attention into every aspect of the human experience. So attention has this really central role that we ignore. Nobody talks about attention. Nobody teaches about attention very much. It's one of these sort of taken for granted things. And people talk about the mystery of mind and the mystery of consciousness, but don't talk much about the one feature of mind and consciousness that we have. We can conceive of it. If you start thinking of your attention as an actual tangible sort of force or field or a direction, or as a thing kind of like you would think of physics, some sort of phenomenon that we can play with, we can move it. So practicing, for example, I always use this example, like flick your toe or flick your finger, and you flick it or hit it with a hammer if you want it to be really serious, and your attention goes there, and you can practice putting your attention wherever you choose. And that the art of practicing placing your attention somewhere, whether it's on a body part or on a thought or on anything, and intentionally putting your attention somewhere, and then learning to intentionally move your attention from somewhere to somewhere else in a continuous path. So even the logic of Aristotle, if you read Socrates, if you read Plato, he always has these cool Socratic dialogues where, Socrates is a character in Plato's writings a lot. And he takes you through this step-by-step logical sequence where every single sentence leads to the next one, leads to the next one, leads to the next one. That's an example of your attention moving through a non-physical space. And it's exactly the same as moving your attention through your body. So all of a sudden, when you pay attention to attention, all of a sudden, Socratic logic or a Qigong practice are one and the same art form. And so every art form and skill that you can fathom that I know of can be conceived in terms of pathways of applied attention. And so all of a sudden you have this one central art that applies to every single art. And so I think there's a lot to be gained from paying attention to attention.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have any practical applications for somebody who learns how to train their attention to maybe try and heal themselves in a way that an everyday person can do?
Yeah, definitely. I would say a really good way to do it is get a feather. Feathers are really useful because they have a very light touch. And just take a feather and touch it to your fingertip and notice that your attention goes where the feather touches. And then trace a little path with the feather along your finger slowly and notice that your attention follows that path. And then trace it along your arm, trace it along your leg, and just practice wherever you feel like it when you're sitting there. And you can even use your fingertip. You don't have to have a feather. Tracing attention paths with a feather or your finger and paying attention to the fact that your attention is following it. And then bit by bit, as it's comfortable and easy, start doing it without touching. Just do it with your mind. And what you'll find as you try to move your attention through different parts of your body, you'll find there's places where you can't even get your attention to go there. It's like, wait, what? You have blind spots. And we all have these habitual blind spots where we can't get our attention to go. Or we have spots where our attention's sort of stuck, like a knot, where you always have this little ache that's just kind of just sitting there all the time, just bugging you in the background, but you kind of ignore it, but it still always aches a little bit. And most of us develop some of those when we're like 13 or something, when our body starts maturing. And that through practicing moving your attention through the places where it's easy, then start moving your attention through the places where where it doesn't flow naturally. And what happens is that in order to get your attention to flow through those places, physical changes take place. You have to change your posture. You have to release some sort of tense muscle. There's tremendous changes that start to occur, and your posture changes, your way of walking changes, your way of moving changes, and it has tremendous overarching positive physical health consequences. That same practice, for example, if you have a headache, you can guide your attention through your head and then out of your head. So you can use it to move pain or release pain. You can use it to control features of your body that seemed to be just running on automatic, that everyone assumes you have no control of. But it's like we only have no control of it because we never tried. You can have control of it. And there's people that demonstrate very dramatically what can happen if you do take control of those things. Like that guy, Iceman.
Yeah, Wim Hof.
Yeah. He's an excellent example of an applied Qigong master. What he does is Qigong, a form of Qigong. He might not call it that because he's not Chinese. And Qigong is a term I'm using very generally, not to just refer to Chinese arts. But he demonstrates that if you really focus on training your attention, you can accomplish things that people think are impossible. And then all these martial artists that can break, outrageous like steel bars and lots of crazy things people can do, or have lightning fast reflexes that are faster than the human eye can recognize. People demonstrate how these things can happen. Or my teacher, Tata in Mexico, he is 105 years old and is radiantly healthy and active, and has never been to a doctor and has never taken any pharmaceutical medicine, not once. He's never taken an aspirin. He's never gone to a doctor. And he's the healthiest person I've ever met. And he doesn't eat some super special diet. If his granddaughter or great-granddaughter brings him a Twinkie or something, some crummy food thing, and offers it to him, he might take a bite. But that's not what he's going to eat regularly. He's not afraid of that. And he's not eating some sort of very, very strict, peculiar diet that makes you live long. He's eating a healthy, natural diet, but he's doing a lot of other things. He's a master of his attention. He's a person that can put his attention where he chooses to put it. And wherever his attention is where he's chosen to put it. And that whatever interest we have, whether it's health or learning how to use a new software, the ability to place your attention where you choose, keep it there so long as you choose, and then, quite importantly, and this is one of the hardest things, to remove it. For example, if I'm really focused on a physics problem and I'm thinking about it for a week, to be able to stop thinking about it and play music or cook dinner, that's what I find to be one of the hardest things, is not just learning to put your attention somewhere, but learning to unput it. I had my master's thesis advisor, this extraordinary person named Dr. John Caulfield. He's passed away now, but the first time I met him, I went and knocked on his office door. I said, "Excuse me, sir, are you busy? Are you busy? Can I come in and talk to you?" He said, "I'm always busy. Come on in." And he immediately turned his attention completely 100% to me. And then as soon as our conversation started losing its sort of value, he would immediately put his attention back into his work. And he has, I don't know, countless patents and inventions, and was one of the most prolific scientists. And I watched him. That's one of the things I witnessed from him. He could put his attention on anything, and he could move it away from that thing so fluidly. I definitely don't have that down pat. My attention has a lot of momentum. It takes me a lot of effort to get it off of where I put it. I'm good at putting it somewhere, but I have a lot to learn about removing it effortlessly and fluidly, and then putting it back, loosening it up.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about some of your teachers. I've spoken with a few people, and it seems like teachers or another word for it would be kind of like mentors is a really important thing for personal growth. Would you say that that's a pretty accurate statement?
In my life, definitely, without a doubt. I had some teachers when I was a kid, that were very influential. My Latin teacher, who taught me to think philosophically and how to argue well and such. And, of course, my parents and family. But then when I became an adult, when I moved to Flagstaff, Arizona, when I was 19, I guess, I started seeking out teachers, and was kind of almost addicted to having a teacher, because I learn so much more. I'm not sure everybody's good at being a student. I think I have a talent for being a student, perhaps, because I'm willing to let one of these people tell me what to do, and then I do what they tell me to do.
Oh, that's
and
rare.
that seems to be something pretty rare. I don't know why, because I'm generally a pretty rebellious person, but I only let very, very, very few people in my life actually tell me what to do. I mostly won't do what anybody tells me to do, less than most people, but a few very exceptional people, I'll do whatever they say. And those few people who've been willing to tell me what to do have been just the greatest gift in my life. And I every single day give thanks all day, because just it's like every good thing about me is their fault.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And whatever's still messed up is my fault.
You're still working on it though.
Yeah.
So is there a lesson that you think you could impart on the world that you think that would be useful for people to learn?
Wow. Yeah, I think this is one of the most important ones, is that we're taught in this modern culture, and I don't know about in ancient cultures because I don't remember. I'm not sure I was around.
Yeah.
But so I can't speak for other times and places, but I've traveled around this world a good bit. And so I can at least speak fairly well for a lot of the planet Earth currently, is that we are taught and generally believe that the only legitimate knowledge, all legitimate knowledge can be stated. It can be put into symbols or words, and that that is the most absurd assumption, and it's actually stupid.
It's damaging.
And just really dumb.
Yeah.
Because all of us know it's not true. So it requires this self-dishonesty. Everyone is pretending that legitimate knowledge can all be put into words. But this is my favorite example. Probably everybody listening has tasted a strawberry. And that's not mystical. It's not magical. It's not far out, the taste of a strawberry. Probably everyone listening can right now sort of imagine the taste of a strawberry. And even if they can't imagine it and conjure it well, they at least know the taste of a strawberry. They can recognize it. It's ultra legitimate knowledge. It's as real as any knowledge can be, but you can't say it. You can't put it into words. You can write poetry about it all you want, but it'll only hint at it. Yeah. And that life is filled with legitimate knowledge that can't be put into words or symbols. And we pretend that that's not the case, and that's a really big deal, because there's more legitimate knowledge that can't be said than can be said, and the very most important knowledge can't be said. And then the question is, well, how do you then get knowledge if it can't be said? The same way you get it from a strawberry. How do you learn what a strawberry tastes like? You taste one. So legitimate knowledge that can't be stated is gotten through direct experience.
It's experiential. Yeah.
It's experiential. One who feels it knows it. And everybody is pretending that that's not the case. Yeah. So so we all know that we need to take care of the earth. We all know lots of things we need to do in our own, even just each person's personal life.
We got to take care of ourselves.
Yeah, by pretending that only that can be said is legit, we then ignore all this stuff we know that we need to do and then don't do it because we discard it. So people are waiting till, for example, scientists today release an announcement that music is good for the brain. And then all of a sudden people are like, oh, then we can do music and it's good for our brain. We already knew that. Mm-hmm. But we're waiting for these till people can put words on something before we'll believe what we already know. And there's no time. We don't have time for that. The world is in a genuine global crisis. And that crisis, to potentially survive, we have to be efficient. And efficiency includes acknowledging and acting on what we know, even if it can't be said and even if it hasn't been proven. We already know some things. We don't have to wait for someone to prove that it's better to be honest. We already know it, because you can't even prove something like that. You can argue about it, and then that's politics. So we're wasting time arguing about things that there's no time to argue about.
Yeah.
But it boils down largely, a lot of the problems in the world and in our personal lives, to the dishonesty of pretending that the only legitimate knowledge is the knowledge that can be communicated, that the knowledge that can be stated, when that's, in fact, we all know that's not true. Tell me what a strawberry tastes like. You can't.
Yeah.
But I know what a strawberry tastes like, and so do you. Yeah. It's not mystical. We put mystical labels on stuff that's not mystical. It's just straightforward. It just can't be said. That doesn't mean it's magic.
Yeah.
It's just how some things are.
That's reality.
Yeah.
Reality can't really be said in words. It has to be experienced.
And that's, really what the Zen and Taoist approaches to things are based on, is right from the start acknowledging that the most important knowledge is precisely knowledge that can't be said.
Yeah.
And even, the kinds of knowledge that Tata in Mexico teaches is unspeakable knowledge. So he's sometimes referred to as or people of his sort as a person of knowledge or a man of knowledge, which is, and then people ask, what that's like. At the beginning I said, what has he taught me? I can't really say, because it's the same thing as what a strawberry tastes like.
Yeah.
So all people like that teach generally through what you've talked to me a lot about is initiation, putting someone into a circumstance that leads to them gaining in some type of knowledge that can't be stated. So you can't write it down, you can't talk about it, but you can pass it along by putting someone in a circumstance that leads to that. Or it seems that people like that, being around them somehow radiates circumstances. And that's the magical part. That part's mystical. That in itself is mystical. How just simply having contact with somebody will lead to circumstances arising that teach you the very type of knowledge that person has.
Yeah.
How that
saying anything to you.
Yeah. How that works, I don't know, but I do know it does work.
Yeah.
So that's why I like being around people like that as much as possible. And it doesn't matter what they say to me or what we do. It's irrelevant. What matters is being in their presence, and then somehow my life changes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So on that note, what is can you identify a time in your life that you had a major paradigm shift?
Yeah.
I'm guessing there'd been
I kind of live in a paradigm shift. It's pretty funny. Recently I had this is sort of ultra personal, but one of the things I always felt like I wasn't really gonna live very long. Like, I'm really surprised I'm still alive. I do a lot of dangerous things. I jump off cliffs and go into desert caves and climb into secret tunnels, and I do like Indiana Jones kind of stuff.
Dance for 4 days straight, get sick.
Yeah, that's one of the least dangerous. I do a lot of, I have a history of doing a lot of stupid, radical, alone, far out in the wilderness maneuvers that I barely survived. And always felt like, or for a long time, I felt like I had a really close friend die he died very young. And I guess that had a tremendous influence on me. I realized I was, I guess, 18 when that happened, or 17. And I realized very clearly that, wow, he was, a young man and died young. And I realized, wow, I might not live very long. And, but while I am alive, what do I want to do with this? Like, what's the game here? What's the objective of this situation? And I settled on an objective, which was essentially to have some sort of positive influence, whatever feels to me to be good. I'm not going to try to define it, and people can argue about what good means all they want, but each of us has some sense of, what feels like we did a good job. At the end of the day, you can feel like, wow, I did a good job today. It's not a philosophical argument. It's just how it is. Yeah. And I want to feel that way about my life. Like, yeah, good job, dude. Yeah. Basically. And what makes me feel like I did a good job is that I utilize whatever talents and blessings I happen to have been, whatever assortment. I think of it like a tool belt. Like, we're each born with a tool belt. Some people have screwdrivers, some people have this tool, some people have that tool. We all have some tool belt. And that if you mix your tool belt with your interests, you'll find some sort of thing that's kind of like, you'll find a life where it's like you're especially suited in a unique way for doing something good for everybody. That's kind of a simplistic way of trying to put it, but I think that's pretty much summarizes how I see it. And my objective has been, while I'm alive, which I never count on being another day longer, which I hope is another century, but I want to do a good thing. I want to leave a positive influence for the children I haven't even met. I want to, I'd like, not for the purpose of some sort of fame or something, but when I'm gone, I want, if someone remembers me, I'd like them to be like, man, good thing that guy came around. That really helped. That it's like if your friend who's a carpenter shows up the day you're working on your house, you're really glad he showed up. I want the world to feel like that about me, one way or the other. And I always thought that would include being very, very much in the public. That sort of, for example, imagine you had some wise thing to say. If you could get on TV and say it in front of everybody.
Say it to the masses. Yeah.
I thought that would help.
Yeah.
And I always looked at that as being crucial. And just a couple days ago, like day before yesterday, that's been a really big sort of objective for me, is to have my voice for whatever good thing I might have to offer, however you want to look at it. I wanted it to be as far reaching as possible for good reasons. I don't really have any interest in fame or something, but at the same time, say I have a song that has really good psychological results for people. Like when they hear it, like Bob Marley's song, like, don't worry about a thing, every little thing. How many people has that song relieved their day?
Yeah.
Like, it brings tears to my eyes right now, trying to think of, holy cow, how many people's hearts has that song healed?
Right. Yeah.
And that Bob Marley has actually been a really huge, huge influence on me, thinking about his music and how many people and how many countries for how many decades his music has healed their life and relieved them of worries and stress.
Yeah.
And so I always associated that with sort of being really as like very much in the public. Because I mean, if Bob Marley's music wasn't famous, I wouldn't know that song.
Yeah.
But I realized really clearly, and I'm not sure I can put it into words, that isn't necessarily the case. That the Taoists, the hermit on the mountain who never even talks to anyone, has, in the way that's challenging to conceive, has just as much, if not more, of a positive influence than the famous kung fu teacher who's got videos in the Whole Foods or whatever. And in fact, it might be even reversed. The guy on the mountain who he doesn't have to spend any of his time thinking about the things that are involved, like, oh, got to put on clean pants because I'm going to be on a video shoot, whereas the guy on the mountain can wear dirty pants and he's practicing kung fu.
Yeah.
And in some sort of way that I can't conceive or describe, I realized really clearly that such is the case, and was relieved of that desire to necessarily, I'm fine with being famous or not being famous, but that became irrelevant. It doesn't matter if I'm famous or not famous. What's relevant is, am I doing my practice, whatever that may be?
You're doing the work that you're called to.
And the whatever positive influence that is capable of is independent of the circumstances of how much contact I have with other people. And that really, that's like a very recent and sort of, almost trite, but it's actually a deeper paradigm shift for me personally than it might seem.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I know the feeling because, we're both musicians and we both kind of grew up thinking about reaching the masses kind of thing. And I know that was a big shift for me also when I figured out that I didn't really need to reach out to the whole world. Sometimes the most effective things are interpersonal, like just one-on-one talking with somebody, or even just sitting in the same room with somebody, like with Tata. That you can't really get that when you're just speaking to the masses. You got to be with somebody to really have that experience. And that's what life is. Life is not being on a stage. It's not having a bunch of people look at you and, learn your songs. It's about having a positive influence on individuals. And that is more effective one-on-one, it seems like.
And there's little tricks too. Like, for example, what if, say I don't know, came up with a really wise sentence, whatever it is. I don't know what it would be, but if I ever came up with some sort of really great sentence that was really helpful to people, telling it to 100,000 people might actually not end up being as positive an influence as if I tell it to the 12 people who happen to all be teachers, who teach it very directly and deeply to 1,000 people each, who 100 of those people are each teachers. So the same information flowing through more people doesn't necessarily make it more effective. It's more a matter of, it's kind of an unpredictable factor of who it goes to, and who that goes to from them, and who that goes to. That we
telephone game where your original message can be bastardized and used in the complete opposite way than it was intended to.
Yeah, Jesus's words reach more people than any other person's words ever, and it's not necessarily the case that situation is as he intended.
Yeah, the church situation.
Yeah, I don't want to get too far into it, but it's not necessarily the case that his words reaching the most possible people is the most effective situation.
Or at least how it's been presented. Yeah. Yeah, I understand that.
Just to be clear, not at all intending to compare anything I say or do to that great human.
Yeah. Well, I feel like...
I don't even have a beard.
You did well. I bet you could have one. You live on top of a mountain. Come on. So, you seem like a relatively balanced and happy person.
That's just on the outside, man.
Yeah, well, okay. But do you have any sort of like recipes for your own happiness at least?
Well, speaking of balance, a couple days ago, I came up with a definition of genius that I think I really like. It's that genius is making one's imbalances useful.
Okay.
I studied neurofeedback for quite some time, and the way neurofeedback works is the sort of field of neurofeedback is that they've basically measured the brain waves of hundreds of thousands of people and have this database that if you're a professional neurofeedback person, you have a database where you have essentially the brain waves of hundreds of thousands of people in different parts of their brain and the frequencies in those parts of the brain compared to the different problems they have. So, for example, people that have like low beta brain waves in some particular part of the brain, that information, if you scan someone's brain, can be compared to the database and shows, everybody in the world that has some particular problems that are associated with that particular brainwave frequency excess or deficiency in some part of the brain. And so the way neurofeedback works is they then create some sort of protocol to train your brain to normalize, basically to train your brain to be normal, to be the average person who has no problem. And I realized if you took Einstein's brainwaves and if he had trained his brain to be normal, to be balanced, to be like everyone else, we wouldn't have relativity. If you took Isaac Newton's, if you took Bob Marley's, took Michael Jordan, took Jesus, took Lao Tzu, or name any great accomplishing, super great gift to the world person of all time, their brains are precisely not normal.
Yeah.
And to normalize one's brains, to normalize one's life, to normalize one's body, to normalize anything about a person is, I believe, the opposite of healing. That it's of course there's some situations where what I'm saying is like reverse.
Yeah.
But that learning to, like, what did Einstein do that was so great? He took his imbalances and made them useful. He was a person who couldn't figure out where his shoes were and couldn't find his own house walking past it. But because he was what people might call spaced out. But he was spaced out because he was able to picture four-dimensional space-time and actually figure out how it works.
Yeah.
He put his imbalance to use. Michael Jordan put his incredible excess and imbalance of being so incredibly physical, he put it to use and inspired the whole world with his ability to fly through the air and do things nobody could do if they were thinking about four-dimensional relativity or something. And that what I believe is that really putting our imbalances to use is just like, it's what I call the definition of genius. And so that touches on what you just said about balance. Like, instead of trying to teach somebody or try to help other people be balanced, I would rather recommend against it, and instead recommend making your imbalance, being more honest with ourselves. Like, in what particular ways am I weird?
Yeah.
And how might that be useful?
Yeah.
Each of us is a peculiar wild card one way or another. How is that useful? Some people are so focused on children. All they think about is children. All they want to do is love children. That's all they want to do. That person should be taking care of children. instead of trying to get them to be more balanced, quit thinking about children all the time.
Yeah.
No, take care of children. You're made for it. Some people are always thinking about, new ways to carve trees or whatever. Everybody's got some imbalances. And I think it's actually overall in a lot of ways negative to try to balance. Of course, there's, it's just, I'm trying to think of where balance is actually good. I'm not exactly sure. Maybe in eating a balanced amount of nutrients.
Yeah. And it seems like when people think about imbalance, they generally think about a deficit. But you brought up a good point with Michael Jordan, is he had an excess of something, which is also an imbalance, but people don't.
And a deficit. I bet that Michael Jordan isn't really that great at doing tensor calculus. Yeah. I don't know him, but I would guess, and I know people that are really great at tensor calculus that are not good at sports.
Yeah.
And that's great. And I feel like our culture is very focused on trying to like it's good to homogenize.
Yeah.
Even our food, we want every apple to look the same. So we're willing to remove all the flavor and nutrients in order to homogenize our apples and have them look like the apple on a cartoon.
Yep.
But the weird shaped apples that aren't quite red and they're like not even any particular color, they're like all weird looking, those taste the best. They're the most delicious and the most nutritious, and they're all weird. And some of them have worms because worms like them because they're not poison.
Yeah. Yep.
Like heirloom tomatoes. Those are the most weirdest things ever. But you taste one and you're like, oh my God, I forgot what a tomato tasted like.
Yeah.
It tastes like heaven.
So that's almost like talking about like Jungian shadow, where you integrate the things that you deem unfit for yourself, or that whatever's wrong with you, those are the things that you repress a lot. And
totally,
according to Jung, he would say that those are the things that you have to figure out what they are and then reintegrate them into your conscious psyche. And that's how you make a whole person, is taking all the deficits and accepting them instead of ignoring them.
Or even instead of thinking of them as deficits, think of them as, strange, peculiar talents.
Yeah.
Instead of that there's a deficit, it's just like a peculiar, unique talent.
That's what makes you an individual.
Like, it's kind of like the demons are only demons when we're telling them to go away.
Yeah. Or if you demonize
and they're not going to go away because they are us.
Yeah.
They're not going to disappear because they are us, but they can be turned into something useful by, and that's tricky to do, is figure out, because there's hardly anybody going to help with that. Yeah. Because everybody else is trying to homogenize you because it's convenient. Mm-hmm. Homogenous people are really convenient to deal with.
One size fits all.
Yeah, it's like, oh, cool. Everybody be the same, and that makes it a lot easier for the elementary school teacher. Everybody's life, gets easier if they're managing homogenous people.
Yeah.
But so it's very seldom that someone's going to help you master your lack of homogeneity.
Yeah. Yeah, and help you become an individual. Well, this has been awesome. Thank you for taking your time out to talk with me and showing me around Silwani. It's beautiful out here. I can see where you can draw a lot of inspiration from. We took a 2-mile hike before we did this, and it was beautiful. We saw some waterfalls and some actual trees and some animals and things you don't see in cities, and it was awesome. So thanks for taking me around and showing me the place.
My honor. I love it. Cool. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to What a World podcast. I hope you got as much out of this episode as I did. I want to invite you now to share, comment, rate, follow, all that good stuff that helps me out tremendously. You can even go to whataworldpodcast.com and donate to help keep What a World Podcast and blog up and running. Any help is appreciated, even if it's a kind word or criticism. I appreciate the time you've given me today, and it is a blessing to be able to do this at all. Have a great day, and you will be hearing from me next week. Thank you.